All right, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Happy New Year to you, and welcome to what will be a new series for us known as Saturday Sit Down Shorts. I am T. Harris at When the Needle Drops,
And I'm QG, aka Nerdy Little Bubba.
and we are welcoming you to our first ever Saturday Sit Down Shorts. So, QG, explain to the people the purpose behind Saturday Sit Down Shorts and why we decided to go this route in 2025.
So basically, the purpose of the Saturday Sit Down Shorts is to kind of give you a little preview of the full format show. We'll highlight something that we'll discuss within the next show, and just kind of give you like an overview. So, just kind of give you a little insight before the main event.
Absolutely. So, like you said, it's a preview before the big show. So, we'll announce that at the end of today's episode. But we are going to jump right into it, man, because we're going to try to keep these shorts to 30 to 40 minutes if we can help it. But you
Yeah.
know us, man, we love music so much. Sometimes we start talking, and next thing you know, time slips away from us. But we're going to do our absolute best to minimize it to 30 minutes. So,
Yeah.
the topic of today's episode is the impact of this album right here, which all collectors should have in their catalog, and it's none
Yes.
other than What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. Okay, so let's talk about the first song you remember from this album. Q, what's the first song or first tracks you remember hearing from this album? When do you remember hearing this album in its entirety or just a select song?
So I remember hearing just a select song, and of course, it's the title track, What's
Yeah.
Going On.
Yeah.
I remember randomly listening to this radio one Saturday. Shout out to the now defunct WPAL in Charleston, South Carolina, the late, great Bob Nichols. He played What's Going On, and I just sat and I just listened to it. And as a kid, the lyrics didn't really hit me like how it did when I heard it as an adult.
Yeah. Yes, first song I remember, just like you, man, was "What's Going On." My grandmother was a huge Marvin Gaye fan. In fact, I remember when Marvin Gaye was killed and that making news. That's probably one of my earliest musical memories and how big of a deal that was when that news hit. But I remember she had it was a Marvin Gaye cassette. It was a greatest hits collection. I think it's called like Every Great Motown Hit by Marvin Gaye.
Yep.
You remember that joint? It was like black background, white right here on a red satin jacket.
I got it on CD.
Yeah. He had a red satin jacket on. And I just remember like listening to, I think, a few songs from What's Going On was on there. But like you said, the title track was the one I remember the most. And just like you, I didn't know what he was talking about. I just knew it was real soulful. But it wasn't until I was middle high school before I realized the importance of that particular song.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, similar experience as you. We all grew up in households where Marvin was a part of everyone's playlist, so to speak. Even though playlist didn't exist, but everybody had Marvin in their catalog in some shape, form, or fashion.
For sure.
All right. So the next question is, Q, I'm gonna let you kind of dive into this one, man. So what pushed Marvin to even make this album? How did we get to the point where this crooner, this balladeer, this sort of smooth and suave gentleman decided that I'm going to make a political album. I'm going to make a protest record, so to speak.
Well, so you got to look at what was going on when he created this album in the year 1971. We were in the deepest throes of the Vietnam War, a war that was not very popular, a war that we found out basically made folks rich while it basically took away from urban and rural communities. I'm not going to get into it that deep. You could do research, but you'll figure out what I mean when I say that. Also, I think Marvin was kind of feeling some kind of way. I think he felt guilty because Tammy Terrell had just passed away. I can't remember if it was in 71 or the year before.
Yeah, I think it was right around that time. Yeah.
Yeah, so Marvin was kind of like in the throes of dealing with the aftermath of her death. And in some ways, he felt kind of guilty about her passing. I'm not exactly sure why. So my understanding is he made this album as kind of a way of, I guess, kind of as a cry for help, but also to kind of highlight that there were a lot of things going on internationally as well as domestically that was just weighing heavy on a lot of people's minds, including his.
Yeah.
Also, this is about 3 years after all the events that happened in 1968. You know, you had MLK getting murdered, you had RFK getting murdered, riots broke out across the country. And so America was just kind of like in a dare I say lost place.
Yeah, and then shortly after that, you had Woodstock in '69. Like it was a lot of the rise of what's called the counterculture or the hippies, so to speak. We transitioned from the civil rights movement to the Black Power movement. So the Black Panthers were starting to become prominent. So the nonviolent approach of King was starting to become more of a don't start none, won't be none type of mentality. And we also got to give credit to Marvin Gaye's brother Frankie, because he was actually fighting over in Vietnam, and his letters back and forth to Marvin was kind of telling him, you know, what was going on over there. And Marvin, like you said, he felt guilty. He was going through a bout of, I know I just kind of read up on this. He was depressed about his friend Terrell passing away. He was trying to figure out in what direction he wanted to go with his music. You know, he kind of felt like he was a puppet at Motown. Like he had no voice, he had no say. And he was more than just what the image that was being presented to the public at that time. Yeah.
And I'm glad that you mentioned about him feeling like a puppet at the time at Motown, because this album and maybe a few others kind of signal a shift in the Motown sound.
Absolutely.
Because up to that point, you know, Motown was making music for, let's just say crossover music. You know, they were trying to capture more of the pop market. You know, they wanted to bring in a more a greater audience than just black folk. Let's just call it what it is. And so this kind of marked a shift in a lot of artists at Motown saying, you know what, we don't care if certain people buy our music. We're going to make music. It's going to be for the people. It's going to be for everybody. You know, we're not doing this cookie cutter, you know, assembly line music anymore.
Yeah. And I found out, man, is when once we decided to do this episode, I kind of started doing a deep dive and learned about like how this song and this particular album came about. This song wasn't even written for Marvin Gaye. It was actually written for the Four Tops. And, the gentleman that wrote the song for the Four Tops, he wrote it as a response to one of the members of the band seeing police brutality. So his question was, what's going on? Like, why are these things happening in this country at this point in time? He presented it to the Four Tops, and the group members turned it down because they didn't want a protest record. They thought it would be too controversial, like you said, because Motown's thing was, we're making music that can be accepted by middle America, for lack of better words.
Yeah.
So he wanted. So he gave it to Marvin. Marvin turned it down, but then Marvin came back to him and said, I'll do it if you allow me to have some writing credits on it, songwriting credits on it. So he agreed, and Marvin did his thing on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny is the Four Tops, they turned it down only to turn around the next year, leave Motown and sign with ABC.
Exactly. Within a year of them turning that down, they leave Motown and go in a totally different direction artistically.
Yeah, they did. Now, granted, I don't think they made any songs that were considered quote unquote protest music, but they still had creative control. But I wonder what it would have sounded like if the Four Tops had actually taken on this song.
Oh, I know. It's like Elise says all the time when we talk about like the what ifs when it comes to music and what if this artist did this song. Sometimes things are meant to be. And I think like the songwriter of this song gave this song to Marvin, and he needed it more than the song needed him, because he was at such a turning point in his career. And this was also the time, like you remember prior to this, man, Marvin was clean cut with the suits. Next thing you know, he comes out in the shadows and he's with the beard and the koofies, and he's dressing totally different than what we'd accustomed to seeing Marvin as at that point.
Yep. And the other piece to it is Marvin actually left the U.S. when this album was made. He was actually living in London. Because I feel like this album cover, and I feel like the whole entire album cover was a picture of him somewhere. I don't know if it was in London or somewhere in the English, countryside.
Yeah.
But he left America for a hot second and was living in London. Again, all this was attributed to him feeling guilty about Tammy Terrell passing, and his own, mental process.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
the time.
And like you said, man, like I think I'd mentioned about his brother Frankie fighting over in Vietnam, and him being a huge inspiration behind this album as well. I think there's a quote there where Marvin said, even though he couldn't necessarily fight face to face or hand to hand combat, that he could do it with his music and his words and the words of his song. So yeah, those are excellent points there. So we talked a little bit about it, but there was this cultural significance. There's a cultural significance behind what's going on and the shift in the Motown sound. So if you look in any music publication, no matter if it's written here in the United States or overseas, what's going on is considered probably a top 5 album of all time, not just for Black music, but for all of music. In fact, Rolling Stone, their top 200, I think, is it top 200 or 500? On their greatest list of greatest albums of all time. The last time they dropped one was 2020 at the turn of the new 5 years ago.
Yeah.
2024, when they dropped this list, it was ranked as their number 1 album of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said,
when that came out.
Yeah, and it influenced a generation. And you won't hear too many arguments when people say that this is one of, if not the best album of all time in American popular music.
I'm in full agreement. I'm actually agree with Rolling Stone on that.
Because normally I don't.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm in full agreement. And it's just the way that it was curated. It's the way that it was crafted.
Mm-hmm.
It was completely, it fit the sound of that day of the early 70s, but it was a complete and different shift from what Motown was used to putting out. Mm-hmm. But it encapsulated a lot of what people were thinking, like, what's going on? Mercy.
Yeah. Yeah. They're talking about saving the children and people's relationship with God and people struggling with drug addiction, man. It hit like you said, everything that was happening at this time is almost is contained in every single song on this album.
Yeah, and just makes me want to holler, just
yeah, like the significance for me when I think about what's going on is just what followed. Like you said, like Marvin kind of opened the doors for his label mates to put out music that was very similar. Without what's going on, you don't get Stevie Wonder's classical period. You don't get Innovisions and those tracks that he put on there about what's going on in the world at the time. You don't get Fulfilling This First Finale.
Right?
Yeah, you don't get some of those albums. You don't get Curtis Mayfield and some of the things that he put out about society at large and what was going on in the Black community. So you don't get those without this album.
I'm in full agreement. And if you look at it again, but if you look at also what was going on in Motown in 1971, you had the Jackson 5. Jackson 5 was putting out, great music, but it was bubblegum.
Yeah.
It was bubblegum, it was pop, right? Then this is also around the same time that Berry Gordy started branching off and doing movies, because the first movie he did was Lady Sings the Blues. So he started kind of shifting his focus from the music more into Hollywood. And also, this is around the same time, I believe, that Motown, either they had already moved to Los Angeles or they were in the process of moving to Los Angeles.
Yep, they were starting to transition to LA, because I think the final mastering on this album took place in LA. The initial recordings were at Hitsville, and the final mastering, the mixing was at the LA studios.
And Barry started expanding, quote unquote, his empire once he got to Los Angeles. Because he bought almost a whole campus, and it was dedicated to Motown.
Yeah. What's funny, man? When I was reading up on this, the first time Marvin played What's Going On for Berry Gordy, he said it was the worst thing he had heard in his life.
Wow.
He said the song was the worst thing he heard in his life. He told Marvin it wasn't going to be a hit, that it had an outdated sound to it with the scatting, that he did in it and sort of the jazz influence behind the song, he said it sounded outdated and that Marvin was going to lose fans as a result of this album. Yeah. So I ain't giving Barry Gordy no credit for the success of this because his initial thought was that it sucked and it was basically going to equal career suicide for Marvin Gaye. So I'm not giving him any credit for this.
Just being short-sighted, you know.
Yeah.
Being short-sighted. Little did he know that Marvin was going to gain a whole legion of fans, and not just here in the United States, but worldwide because of this album. It was going to open new doors to people saying, well, who's this Marvin Gaye fellow that may not have already known?
Exactly. Yeah. So I did find out as well that the whoever was over sales at Motown put the song out without Barry's knowledge. He actually had 100,000 copies pressed and sent out nationwide, and the song went #1 instantly. So that's when it hit the airwaves and it became an instant hit. That's when Barry Gordy was like, okay, go ahead and proceed with the full album. And they recorded it in 10 days. So they put all this good music out in 10 days, man.
Wow.
Yeah. Crazy.
That is crazy. And that speaks to, again, it kind of speaks to the assembly line concept that Barry used to build Motown, but that concept actually built a great album.
Yeah. And you can talk, I'll let you talk a little bit more about this, man. Like, how was this album, we talk about the shift in Motown sound. How was this album such a dramatic difference than what Motown was from before what's going on? How is this so different?
I mean, in my opinion, it got away from that same formula. Like, I don't know if the what's the name of the dudes that used to play on the Motown hits?
The Funk Brothers.
The Funk Brothers.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure the Funk Brothers played on this, but it doesn't sound like it.
Yeah, but what's crazy is they actually did. They did play on it, but like it's totally different than what we were accustomed to.
Yeah, I mean, it strayed away from the formula, and for lack of a better term, I'll just say it. I feel like this was the part of Motown's focus on being respectable. Because I feel like everything was done in the 60s. Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking Motown, in the 60s at all.
Let's make that clear for the people who will tune in. Like,
right. I'm not knocking Motown at all because they kicked down doors that were closed.
Yeah.
We
understand the significance of Motown as far as advancing the sound of Black music and making Black artists household names.
Basically, I mean, they kicked down doors. I mean, they were getting artists on, Ed Sullivan, American Bandstand, every little show you could think of. They were traveling, to places throughout the U.S. Black artists previously would not have been allowed to.
Yeah, playing at the Copacabana.
Right. But at the same time, a lot of respectability politics was played into that. And, I get it now. Like, looking at it through an adult lens, I get it, right? Like, this is what Barry kind of had to do in order to build the company that he wanted.
Yeah.
But this album was a departure from that. Because, again, the artists that were coming out with music starting after this album said, you know what, we're not doing this no more. We're going to do this our way. The music is still going to sound pure. The people will still like it. But this is what we're going to put out. And it worked.
It worked. Yeah. Like one thing about Motown in the 60s, this is why a lot of their artists had so many albums that were dropping because they were single driven. It was like it was radio hits, hits, and then they would cover each other's music. Like Marvin became famous for I Heard It Through the Grapevine, but so many other acts had recorded that prior to him. But his was the one that blew up.
Right, because Glass Knight and the Pips did I Heard It Through the Grapevine. And they were on Motown through the Soul subsidiary. But yeah, you're right. Marvin's was the one that blew up.
Yeah, it was single driven, like you said, assembly line, quality control. Like, I mean, these guys, when you're an artist on Motown, you had to go through like a academy almost before you even allowed to put an album out. Like, they wanted to make sure you were polished and ready to be seen by the public and accepted by the public. Not just by the music you put out, but also how you looked.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you had to get your dance steps down, right? You had voice and diction classes, even down to how you just actually looked.
Yeah.
And how you carried yourself,
Yeah, like I said, part of that comes from Barry Gordy's background from working in the automobile industry. That sort of assembly line focus on putting musicians out.
Yep. And I mean, he made sure that before you went out, he basically wasn't going to put out any trash.
No.
He was not going to put out any trash.
Mm-hmm.
If you had it, you had it. If you didn't, well,
yeah, you didn't last long. You didn't last long. So,
but yes,
yeah, the cultural significance of it, man, just the social and political commentary of it. Like you said, we talked about the Vietnam War, talked about poverty, you talked about police brutality, what was going on in the black neighborhoods of America, hatred, suffering. I mean, it ran the gamut. And one thing I really like about this album is, after listening to it yesterday, I hadn't listened to what's going on in a long time, and so I finally just put my headphones on and said, let me take a close listen to it, not just sitting and letting the record spin. All those songs blend so seamlessly into the next song, man. It's like it's almost like a theatrical production. How lush the production is from start to finish.
Yep. Yeah, and that was one of the things I noticed when I heard the album as an adult. Was that it was like they almost planned it to where the music would just blend in, you know, like onto the next track. It's like it's telling a whole story, you know. Because if you notice, like, it's not like some albums where you'll get like one track, kind of like say what's going on, but then you get something that's up tempo, and then all of a sudden you get something that's a slow jam, you know, or mid tempo. No, this album basically paints a picture of what was going on with Black America at that time.
Exactly.
But and really, I mean, it was mainly focused, in my opinion, on Black America, but just America, period.
Period. Yeah. Like you said, that was a tough time for this country from 68 to about 70, 71 when the album dropped. So I'm gonna read this thing. I was gonna share this with you, man. When I was listening to it on Apple Music. You know, Apple Music will have the bio for each album. And one thing it said, let me find it, in the album bio, it said, the revelation is that political music doesn't have to be confrontational. It can be mellow and inviting too. The province, not just of radicals, but the same mixed middle-class audience that had been buying his albums all along. You catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And as Gaye seems to say on What's Going On, you don't have to be a hippie to be worried about what you see. You just have to be human. That's profound. Yeah.
Very profound.
Yeah, so it's funny. Barry Gordy said this was going to be a career-ending move for Marvin, but the same people who consumed the music that he was worried about not liking it ate it up.
They did. But now I sometimes wonder, were they listening to what Marvin was singing, or were they just listening to Marvin just singing?
So were they more interested in the voice or the message?
Right. And that is the question that probably will never be answered. But I equate it to people who listen to Tupac, because I know people that listen to Tupac, and it's like, well, you know, are you really listening to what Tupac is saying, or are you just listening to Tupac because it's hip and it's urban and it's edgy?
Man, it's funny you mentioned Tupac. When we think about what's going on, we think about other albums that were influenced by this. Tupac's Me Against the World almost sort of fits in that same vein. And then 20 years down the road, you get Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. Like similar type themes, but different times. But all the same kind of on that family tree of political and protest albums.
Well, I would even dare say Tupacalypse Now is a microcosm or a follow-up to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. Because the same things that he talked about in 1971 were still occurring in 1991. Because you had Vietnam War, you had the Gulf War.
Yep.
Police brutality, Rodney King.
Yeah.
You know, drugs, might have been heroin, coke, crack.
Same thing.
You know, young girls having kids. Brenda's Got a Baby.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Mercy, Mercy Me, Keep Your Head Up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all that is 20 years apart.
It is. It is.
Although I think Tupacalypse Now might have came out in 90 or 91. I got to go back and look.
Apocalypse Now was 91
or 92.
It came out right after Juice. And then he dropped Strictly for My Keep Your Head Up on it. So like you said, like almost kind of that same, those influencers were there. And I attribute that to Tupac's upbringing. Mama being a Panther and growing up around members of that organization. Yeah.
And they probably was listening to What's Going On. So this album influenced a whole generation or generations of artists, whether it be R&B or whether it be in hip hop.
Yeah, and like you said, that this album gave people license to sing about things that were of importance.
Right.
It wasn't all sweet just because I'm famous. Like I'm affected by the exact same things that everyone else is having issues with in our communities or in the world at large. One thing, let me see. I think we kind of hit on most of these things. Oh, I did find this out. So shortly after the release of this album, Sly and the Family Stone released the response record to What's Going On, and they answered the question. The question was, what's going on? So Sly and the Family Stone released, there's a riot going on. That's what's going on. So theirs was like a complete contrast to what Marvin put out. Right. Marvin's sound was very lush and jazz inspired and orchestral almost. And Sly and the Family Stone was psychedelic soul, black power, rock and roll influence.
And you know what's funny is that it took a black label, as in Motown, to start all this, so that the major labels would say, "Well, you know what? This sound seems to be working. We're going to continue to roll with it." Hence why, like you said, Sly and the Family Stone was able to put out "It's a Riot Going On." Curtis Mayfield was able to put out his albums, even though it was technically his own label. He still had distribution with major labels, and they were willing to take the chance to put this music out.
Don't forget about the Isley Brothers. Shortly thereafter, "Go for Your Guns" album. Like, man, it was from that point, from the time Marvin dropped that album, from the 70s throughout, all your major acts had either albums that were politically themed, or at least at minimum had songs on their albums that were politically or protest driven.
Same thing with James Brown.
Yep.
Same with James Brown. So, but it's crazy. It's funny how that period didn't last throughout the entire decade.
Why do you think that is, man? It's funny you say that.
Well, because again, you got to look at everything that was going on in 71 up until about 74, when the whole Nixon debacle thing, right? But look at what happened starting in 74, 75. The music started changing over to disco. It went from political type music to funk,
soul,
right? Soul ballads into disco. Because at that point, I think, and this is just my opinion, because of course I wasn't born till 78, but I think a lot of people were probably tired and weary because of what happened, from 68 up until about 74, 75. And also 74 was the year when the U.S. finally pulled out, or, they started pulling out in 72. But by 74, 75, the war was pretty much over in Vietnam. Like all the troops had been pulled out and they were coming back. So people wanted to forget. People wanted to escape. So people weren't into listening to, the political and or protest music. Everybody just wanted to escape, forget, dance.
Yeah. They just wanted, at that point, everybody wanted to have a good time. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So let's get into our favorite tracks from this album. All right, Q, if you had, so there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 9 tracks on this album. Of the 9 songs on this album, if you had to narrow it down to 3, what are your top 3 on this album?
Well, of course, I'm gonna say What's Going On.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say Save the Children.
Yeah.
And Inner City Blues.
Okay. So my favorite song on this album probably one of my favorite, top 3 in Marvin's catalog is "Make Me Wanna Holler."
Mm-hmm.
Love it. "Mercy, Mercy Me," and then the last one is "Flying High in the Friendly Sky." And
Mm-hmm.
most people think he's talking about taking a flight. Now he ain't talking about he taking a flight, but he ain't taking a flight like you think he taking a flight.
Yeah, because unfortunately, I think the guilt he felt over losing Tammy Terrell,
Mm-hmm.
and combined with his mental state, pushed him
Mm-hmm.
into the world of Lady Cocaine.
Yep. 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 So
Yeah, and unfortunately, once he started that, it took a hold on him.
it did, man. That's the sad thing about it. And there was no type of help like that for those who struggled with codependency during that time.
Right.
Um, yeah. And I forgot to mention, all at this time, he was also going through his divorce with Anna Gordy, which was nasty.
Yep, it was.
Yeah, really nasty. In
It
fact,
was.
look up the credits to all these songs. She has writing credits on it because that's how he was able to pay his alimony.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, those are my 3 favorite songs. But again, like if you are a fan of this album, you can't go wrong with any of the songs on this album.
Nope.
Most people will, of course, like you named the title track, but all the songs are good. And like we said earlier, they just flow seamlessly one track into another. All right, so we are going to start wrapping up, and we're going to talk about our next episode, which will debut on Saturday, January 18th, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Q, tell the people about this particular episode, because we've been talking about this one for a couple months, man. I think the folks are going to enjoy this.
So, if you can't already tell, our next episode will be about movement music, a soundtrack for the people. Basically, it's going to be songs of empowerment, songs of protest, songs just talking about the state of the world, at the time that they were recorded, which can apply to today. It's not lost on us that, the weekend that we decide to do the show will also be the MLK weekend.
Mm-hmm.
It will also be the weekend leading up to the presidential inauguration, because it is what it is. This is where we are.
Yeah.
So we decided that we wanted to highlight some of the songs, again, that just talk about the state of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing I always love about music, whenever there is some sort of social, cultural, or political shift, the music sort of takes on what's going on at that time. Whether that be songs of protest and songs talking about the ills of society, or like even Q said, when we moved out of that period and we decided we wanted to dance and boogie, because we wanted things to be better and we didn't want to think about what was causing us so much worry and concern and doubt and fear and anxiety. So we're gonna talk about that in more detail. But that episode in particular, January 18th episode, will be live as usual. So be on the lookout for the flyer and advertisement announcement that will come via Instagram. All right. Yep. So this particular episode here is being recorded. It will be posted soon, so be on the lookout for that. And in closing, you got anything you want to add before we shut it down?
Yeah, so be on the lookout for more of these Saturday sit-down shorts, in which we will highlight an artist that will give you a preview of what the next upcoming show after that will be, because there will be plenty more in the future. So buckle up.
All right, and with that being said, we are closing out this episode. We look forward to you guys tuning into this. It will be posted a week from today, next Saturday, January 11th at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to try to see if we can put a live chat feature on there, and Q and I will jump in and participate with those who are able to watch and discuss alongside with them what we're sharing here this evening. So again, this will be posted on Saturday, January 11th. We look forward to having y'all there and participating in the live chat with us. And then, of course, the movement music episode will be live on Saturday, January 18th. And with that being said, I am T. Harris signing off.
And I'm QG, Nerdy Lil Bubba, signing off.
All right. You guys have a blessed weekend. And again, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Let's get it.